Good morning, students. Today we are going to start with a new story written by William Douglas. The title of the story is Deep Water. It is from the book Resonance. So please turn to page 43. Now, before I start with the explanation of the text, I want to give you a brief introduction of the author, William Douglas. So, Deep Water is written by William Douglas. He was born in the year 1898 and he died in the year 1980. He was the longest serving justice or judge in the history of the Supreme Court of the United States of America, right from 1939 to 1975. He was also a prolific writer, meaning that he wrote in large numbers. On conservation, he wrote on conservation, he wrote on history, he wrote on politics, and also on foreign relations. He fought for human rights or individuals' freedom. Some of his well-known works are Of Men and Mountains, published in the year 1950, A Wilderness Bill of Rights, published in the year 1965. So students, I hope you are clear with a brief of the author, William Douglas. Now let us go back to the story Deep Water. You see, students, right before the narration, the author has posed some questions before you in this section, the warm-up section. So let's read those questions first. Do you know someone who is afraid of the dark? So students, are you afraid of the dark? Or has a fear of flying? Or are you fearful of flying? Do you think such fears are sparked off by some unpleasant or frightening experience? So students, do you think such fears, that is fear of the dark or fear of flying, is caused by some unpleasant or frightening experience, is caused by some traumatic experience? Can such fears be overcome? Can they be overcome? And how can you overcome them? These are the questions that the author has posed before us. So do think about them a little. And now let us start with the explanation. It had happened when I was 10 or 11 years old. So the narrator says that an incident took place when he was 10 or 11 years of age. I had decided to learn to swim. He had decided that he is going to learn swimming. There was a pool at the YMCA in Yakima. So he's talking about a swimming pool at the YMCA. The full form of YMCA is Young Men's Christian Association. Students, please note down. The full form of YMCA is the Young Men's Christian Association, which is located in Yakima. Now, Yakima is a city in Washington. So, the pool at the YMCA in Yakima offered the opportunity for the narrator to learn swimming. That offered exactly the opportunity. The Yakima River was treacherous. So, the Yakima River, okay, we are not talking about the pool now, we are talking about the river in the city. It was treacherous, meaning that it was unpredictably dangerous. Mother continually warned against it and kept fresh in my mind the details of each drowning in the river. So the narrator's mother did not want the narrator to swim in the Yakima River because it was dangerous. She warned him against it and also told him stories about each drowning that took place in the river. But the YMCA pool was safe. So remember, students, that the narrator was going to learn swimming in the YMCA swimming pool and not in the Yakima River. So the YMCA pool was safe. It was only 2 or 3 feet deep at the shallow end. So students, a swimming pool has a shallow end and it has a deep end. So what is the meaning of shallow, or what is the shallow end? The shallow end is that part of the pool where water is the least deep. It is not very deep. The water is not very deep at the shallow end. Okay? So at this end, the water was only 2 or 3 feet deep. And while it was 9 feet deep at the other, which means the deeper end was 9 feet deep, the drop was gradual. Okay, so the swimming pool sloped gradually. Okay, it did not drop all of a sudden, but it sloped gradually. I got a pair of water wings and went to the pool. So students, are you aware what are water wings? You may note down. Water wings are inflated rings or rings filled with air. These rings are fixed to the arms to keep the swimmers floating. Okay, you must have seen in movies or videos that children wear these rubber tubes around their waist and hands. These are called water wings. Okay, let me repeat. What are water wings? Water wings are inflated rings or rings filled with air. These are fixed to the arms to keep swimmers floating. So the narrator got a pair of water wings and went to the pool. I hated to walk naked into it and show my skinny legs. So you see, the narrator is also describing himself, calling himself skinny, saying that he has skinny legs. He is probably very thin. But I subdued my pride and did it. He ate up his pride. He toned down his pride. The meaning of subdue, you may note down, means to soften or to tone down. From the beginning, however, I had an aversion to the water when I was in it. So you see, the narrator did not like getting into the water. He disliked water. Aversion means strong dislike. So he disliked getting into the water. This started when I was 3 or 4 years old. So another incident had taken place when he was 3 or 4 years of age, when his father took him to the beach in California. So at this age, he was taken to the beach in California. He and I stood together in the surf. So the narrator's father and himself, he stood together at the surf. What is a surf? Students, note down. Surf is the line of foam formed by waves. If you have visited a beach, you must have seen that when waves splash on the beach, it forms a line of foam. So that line of foam formed by waves breaking into the seashore is called the surf. I hung on to him, yet the waves knocked me down. So the force of the waves was very great and swept me over. I was buried in water. So the water covered him. My breath was gone. He couldn't breathe. I was frightened. He was very scared. The narrator was frightened. Father laughed, but there was terror in my heart at the overpowering force of the waves. So you see, students, the waves were stronger than the narrator. It overpowered him. It took over him. And which is why the fear remained in his heart. But his father took it lightly and laughed at the narrator's fear. My introduction to the YMCA swimming pool revived unpleasant memories and stirred childish fears. So he was reminded, the narrator was reminded of the incident which took place when he was 3 or 4 years of age. But in a little while, I gathered confidence. I paddled with my new water wings, watching the other boys and trying to learn by aping them. So you see, the narrator was trying to overcome his fear of water, his aversion to water, by watching the other children and trying to ape them. Aping means imitating. Okay, so he paddled with his new water wings. I've already told you what water wings are. These are inflated rings. These are rings filled with air to keep swimmers afloat. I did this 2 or 3 times on different days. So he practiced swimming 2 or 3 times on different days and was just beginning to feel at ease in the water. So he was just getting used to the feeling of swimming in the water when the misadventure happened. So right then, when he was getting used to swimming in the water, a misadventure happened. Something had happened. Now let us look at what had happened. I went to the pool when no one else was there. The place was quiet, the water was still, and the tiled bottom was as white and clean as a bathtub. So you see, one day the narrator went to the pool all by himself, when no one was there besides him. He describes the place. The place was quiet because nobody was present besides him. The water was still, and the tiled bottom of the pool was as white and clean as a bathtub. So he could see through the water of the pool right till the tiled bottom. It was very clear. It was very clean. I was timid about going in alone. So he says that he was afraid. He was very frightened about going inside the pool alone. Timid means afraid or frightened. You may note down. Timid means afraid or frightened. So I sat on the side of the pool to wait for others. So he sat. He did not get into the pool. He sat by the side of the pool while waiting for others. I had not been there long when in came a big bruiser of a boy, probably 18 years old. So while he was waiting for the others to join in, a big boy came in. He describes the big boy as a big bruiser. Who is a bruiser? A big bruiser is described as someone who is very tough and aggressive. Okay, so this boy, 18 years of age, is very tough and aggressive. He had thick hair on his chest. He was a beautiful physical specimen with legs and arms that showed rippling muscles. So the narrator describes the big boy. First of all, he says that the big boy seemed tough and aggressive and very rough, and also he had a beautiful body. He had hair on his chest and a very muscular build. Okay, legs and arms that showed rippling muscles. So the big boy yelled, "Hi Skinny, how do you like to be ducked?" So this is what he tells the narrator. Students, if you remember, the narrator had already described himself as skinny. So the big boy calls the narrator skinny and threatens him, says, "How do you like to be ducked?" What is the meaning of ducked? Ducked means to be pushed or plunged under water. Okay, you may note down. Ducked means to be pushed or plunged under water. With that, he picked me up and tossed me into the deep end. Students, you may recall that I have already told you that a pool has a shallow end and a pool has a deeper end. Okay, so the narrator was thrown. He was casually thrown. Tossed means to be thrown casually into the deeper end of the pool. I landed in a sitting position, swallowed water, and went at once to the bottom. So he could not stay afloat. The narrator landed right to the bottom of the pool on the deeper end. He landed in a sitting position and also swallowed a lot of water. I was frightened, but not yet frightened out of my wits. So he could still think. He was very afraid, but he still had not lost his wits. On the way down, I planned. When my feet hit the bottom, I would make a big jump, come to the surface, lie flat on it, and paddle to the edge of the pool. So this is what he had planned, okay, while keeping his wits about. He had planned that on his way down to the pool, right when his feet hits the bottom, he would take a big jump, okay? And while taking a big jump, he would come up to the surface of the water. He would lie flat on it, try to swim while lying flat, and then paddle towards the edge of the pool. Okay? So this is his plan. It seemed a long way down. Now students, if you remember that he was tossed into the deep end. So that is why it was taking a long time to reach towards the bottom of the pool. Those 9 feet were more like 90. So you have to remember that the deep end of the pool is 9 feet. Okay? So this 9 feet seemed deeper, more like 90 feet. Before I touched the bottom, my lungs were ready to burst. So why were his lungs ready to burst? You need to remember that he was thrown casually into the water, and also he had swallowed a lot of water while going inside. The water puts a lot of pressure on the human body, and which is why he could not breathe and his lungs were ready to burst. But when my feet hit bottom, I summoned all my strength and made what I thought was a great spring upwards. Do you remember his plan? Once his feet hit the bottom, he is going to jump upwards. Okay? So he gathered all his strength. He summoned all his strength and made that great jump upwards. I imagined I would bob to the surface like a cork. He thought that he would spring up like a cork. However, did that happen? We need to see. Instead, I came up slowly. I opened my eyes and saw nothing but water. So he could not reach to the surface of the water with that jump. So maybe it was not that big of a jump either. Water that had a dirty yellow tinge to it. So all he could see when he opened his eyes was the water which had a dirty yellow color to it. I grew panicky, so he grew anxious. I reached up as if to grab a rope and my hands clutched only at water. So he was trying to hold on to something. You see, when people are drowning, they try to hold on to something. But the narrator could only grab water. Okay? He could not find anything near his hand. All around him, there was only water with a dirty yellow color to it. I was suffocating. He could not breathe. I tried to yell, but no sound came out. Then my eyes and nose came out of the water, but not my mouth. So you see, he had made a big jump according to him when he reached the bottom. However, I'm saying that the jump was not high enough because he was slowly coming upwards. But only his eyes and nose came out of water, not his mouth. I flailed at the surface of the water, swallowed and choked. What is the meaning of flail? Students, you may note down. He swung his hands wildly, okay? Which means swinging his hands wildly in the water. So he swung his hands wildly in the water. He swallowed a lot of water and choked while swallowing the water. I tried to bring my legs up, but they hung as dead weights, paralyzed and rigid. So he could not move his legs now. They felt like dead weights. Paralyzed and rigid, he was unable to bend his feet. A great force was pulling me under. So something was pulling him under. That is the force of the water as well as the force of gravity. It was pulling him under. I screamed, but only the water heard me. So nobody could hear him because he was screaming underwater. And he could only swallow water while screaming. I had started on the long journey back to the bottom of the pool. So again, because he no longer had any strength to move his hands or legs about, he again started his long journey back to the bottom of the pool. So he was drowning again. I struck at the water as I went down. So he hit forcibly at the water while he was going down. Expending my strength as one in a nightmare fights an irresistible force. So he used up all his energy. Expending means to use up or to spend. So he used up all his strength and energy as someone in a nightmare fights with an irresistible force. So you see, he is using a comparison in this line. It is a simile, a figure of speech, simile. So he's comparing his reality of drowning to the reality of someone who fights in a nightmare with an irresistible force, with a powerful or uncontrollable force. Okay, that is the meaning of irresistible. I had lost all my breath. So the narrator is saying that he no longer had the strength to breathe. My lungs ached and my head throbbed. Because he could no longer breathe, his chest started hurting and his head was throbbing, which means that it was paining in a series of regular beats. Okay, throbbing means pain in a series of regular beats. You may note down. I repeat, throbbing means pain in a series of regular beats. I was getting dizzy, so he was losing balance. He was about to faint. But I remembered the strategy. Students, what is the strategy? His strategy was to make a big jump once he hits the bottom, and then to come up to the surface and lie flat on the surface of water and paddle to the edge of the pool. That was his plan, if you remember. So I remember the strategy. I would spring from the bottom of the pool and come like a cork to the surface. What is a cork? It is put into the mouth of the bottle, into the top of the bottle, and it is generally made of oak, which is why it floats. Okay? I would lie flat on the water, strike out with my arms and thrash with my legs. So he was going to swim once he reached the surface of the water. Then I would get to the edge of the pool and be safe. However, I went down endlessly, so he couldn't reach the surface no matter how hard he tried. I opened my eyes. Nothing but water with a yellow glow. So the yellowish tinge of the water remained. Dark water that one could not see through. So he could not see through the water. The water was murky, it was unclear. And then sheer stark terror seized me. So in this paragraph, you'll see that he is describing his fear. It was sheer and stark. It was complete and absolute. Sorry, let me correct myself. It was complete and absolute. Okay, so this fear was complete and absolute. It was very severe. The horror which he felt at that moment was very severe. So sheer stark terror seized me. It took hold of him. Terror that knows no understanding. Terror that knows no control. So it cannot be controlled. This terror that he felt at that moment, it could not be controlled. It knew no boundaries. Terror that no one can understand who has not experienced it. I was shrieking underwater. He was trying to shout underwater. What is a shriek, students? Shrieking is a high pitched, piercing cry. Okay, so he was almost crying underwater. It was high pitched. I was paralyzed underwater. He could not move. If you remember, he had already mentioned that his legs were stiff, rigid with fear. Even the screams in my throat were frozen. Only my heart and the pounding in my head said I was still alive. So his beating heart and the pain beating in his forehead, the rhythmic, regular, painful beats in his forehead told him that he was still alive. And then, in the midst of the terror, came a touch of reason. So, even though he was fearful, he was extremely afraid at the moment, he could rationalize, okay? He could reason out. I must remember to jump when I hit the bottom. So he kept on repetitively telling himself that he must jump once he reached the bottom of the pool. At last, I felt the tiles under me. My toes reached out as if to grab them. I jumped with everything I had. So again he took a leap of faith. But the jump made no difference. The water was still around me. I looked for ropes, ladders, water wings. So you see, even though he had made a jump, he could only see water around him. He tried to grasp ropes, ladders, or water wings, anything that he could find near him. But he could find nothing but water. A mass of yellow water held me. Again, he describes the water as yellow. Mass means a large body of matter. In this case, the mass is that of the yellow water, which had caught hold of him and was not letting him go. Stark terror, complete and absolute terror, took an even deeper hold on me. Like a great discharge of electricity. So you see, again, he is describing his terror to that of electricity, of a discharge of electricity which runs through the body. Okay, so that is the kind of terror which shook him, which caught hold of him. So again, here a figure of speech is being used, that is a simile. His terror, the fear that he felt, is being described to a discharge of electricity which runs through the body. I shook and trembled with fright. So he was afraid, he was very afraid. My arms couldn't move. My legs wouldn't move. So he was paralyzed, rigid with fear. I tried to call for help, to call for mother. Nothing happened. And then, strangely, there was light. So you could see light at a distance. I was coming out of the awful yellow water. At least my eyes were. So again, his eyes were coming out of the water. My nose was almost out too. Then I started down a third time. So again, a third time, he started his journey towards the bottom of the pool. I sucked for air and got water. He tried to breathe in air, but you see that his nose was almost out of the water, but not nearly out. So while he sucked for air, he got only water. The yellowish light was going out. He could no longer see the light because he was going underwater again. Then all effort ceased. All effort on his part to jump out of the water came to an end. I relaxed. Even my legs felt limp, which means his legs felt stiff. Limp means difficult to move his legs. He felt difficulty to move his legs. And a blackness swept over my brain. Okay, so sleep was washing over his brain. See, this paragraph describes his near-death experience very clearly, what he felt at that moment when he stopped trying. My legs felt limp. His legs were already very rigid and he found difficulty to move his legs. Blackness swept over him. He had already mentioned that he was feeling very dizzy. So now he was losing his consciousness as well. It wiped out fear. It wiped out terror. So you see, because he was no longer in his right state of mind, he was losing consciousness. It had wiped out fear. There was no more fear, no more terror, no more panic. It was quiet and peaceful. Nothing to be afraid of. This is nice. To be drowsy, to go to sleep, no need to jump, too tired to jump. It's nice to be carried gently, to float along in space. Tender arms around me, tender arms like mothers. Now I must go to sleep. So this blackness, he says that this blackness, that is, his losing consciousness, felt nice because he could no longer feel the fear, the terror, the anxiousness. It was very quiet and peaceful. He felt as if he was going to sleep in the arms of his mother. He felt that his mother's tender arms were holding on to him. He seemed to float in space. He says, now I must go to sleep. You see, sleep here describes death. He almost felt like he was dying. Okay, so this is his near-death experience. This is what death must feel like for him. He says, I crossed to oblivion, which means that he was unaware, unconscious of what was happening around. Oblivion means unaware or unconscious of what is happening around. And the curtain of life fell, which means the sense of dying. He could only sense death now. The next I remember, I was lying on my stomach beside the pool, vomiting. So he was not yet dead. Somebody had saved him. He was lying on the edge of the pool and he was vomiting. The chap, the fellow that threw me in, was saying, so you see the big bruiser of a boy, the 18-year rough and tough boy said, but I was only fooling. So he is telling someone that I was only joking. The other person said, the kid nearly died. Be all right now. Let's carry him to the locker room. So the other person is telling the big boy that you see the child with whom you were joking, he could have lost his life. It is all right now. So let us carry him to the locker room. Several hours later, I walked home. I was weak and trembling. So he had managed to live and he was on his way home. He was still very weak and his legs were shaky. I shook and cried when I lay on my bed. When he was on his bed, he shook and cried for hours. I couldn't eat that night. For days, a haunting fear was in my heart. So you see, this experience was so traumatic for him that for quite a number of days, this fear remained with him. Okay, he couldn't even eat the night that incident had happened. The slightest exertion upset me, making me wobbly in the knees. So the slightest exertion, that is physical or mental effort, any sort of thought, any sort of provocation, upset him, disturbed him, making me wobbly. You know, he had very unsteady or unstable. He had very shaky feet, and he was sick to the stomach. He was puking. Okay, all this while his stomach felt upset whenever he exerted himself slightly. I never went back to the pool, so he stopped learning how to swim. I feared water, so his aversion to water got back to him. I avoided it whenever I could, so he had stopped swimming completely. Students, let us stop here for today. We will continue in the next class.